I'm back with another one, and I wish you all a happy Halloween this 2023. So I'm just going to start in with the stories that my aunt had sent in to me. Starting 6 years ago, her and a cousin of mine went to Vicksburg, Mississippi to visit Civil War sites. They were staying at the Duff Green Mansion, historic site bed and breakfast. And she says we were on the top floor. We knew the Duff Green Mansion had some reports of ghost paranormal activity over the years, but I never felt the least bit frightened or weirded out by the place, though my cousin did. She was in the adjoining room. During the Vicksburg siege, the house was used as a hospital for soldiers, the top floor being reserved for injured Union soldiers. The thought being that if the place was hit by cannon fire, they'd be the ones to be hit and not the Confederates. Well, after a full day of touring about, we were pretty pounded, and I went right to sleep in the bed you see in the photo. During the night, I distinctly heard the sound of a large chain being dropped to the ground right beside the bed, near the little table. It was unmistakable. I was so tired I didn't even flinch, though. I just filed the incident away in my memory and told the cousin and the proprietor about it the next day. We learned later that our bathroom, you can see the door to it, was used as the morgue. It had a second door out to a veranda. The bodies of the deceased were hauled out through this door so as not to be in the view of patients, whom they didn't want to upset. We were there for a few nights. I heard voices murmuring indistinctively at night, more than once, though I can't guarantee they weren't caused by kitchen staff prepping for breakfast. And the last night, overheard in the attic, I heard footsteps racing back and forth repeatedly. But maybe those were raccoons. The other story I have for you is one of my mom that she told me. And again, this is told by my aunt. After she moved to South Carolina, she lived with my younger sister's family in an old plantation house. Not nearly so grand as that sounds. It was just a big farmhouse with a few acres. Mom was not one for experiencing paranormal stuff in the least. One day she was out in the heat, working in the garden. Both my nephew and my sister saw her from an upstairs window, and there was a black man working alongside her. They thought he was a local, I believe. Anyway, when my mom came back into the house, they both asked her who it had been with her in the garden helping her. She hadn't seen no one. She laughed afterward and said she figured one slave recognized another and came out to help her. Also, at that same house, there were repeated sightings of a ghost cat, just glimpses of it walking through the hall. Another story my aunt sent in. She says, I always heard the story about how the family drove in one afternoon or evening and saw someone in a black raincoat walking into the barn. I think that's what it was. And nobody was there. Mom was a kid at the time and didn't notice anything, but she remembers them talking about it. Lots of Indian activity on that place in the past, bunches of arrowheads found in the field. Grandma Clark told of a time in Hamilton when she was walking across a bridge and saw 2 army nurses ahead of her approaching. She was distracted for a moment, and when she looked up, there were no nurses in sight, nor behind her, as if they had passed her. I guess it was a long enough bridge that it was uncanny. They didn't just, change their minds and turn back or something. Now she goes on to tell about her doppelganger story. The time I had that doppelganger kind of thing, I was in high school. Our school was crowded and the new one hadn't been built yet, so we had split shifts. I went to school from 7 a.m. to noon, and when I got home, Mom was at work. Sometimes she came home for lunch, though. Anyway, I was in the house alone, or so I thought, and Mom crossed ahead of me in the hallway, going into the bathroom. She had on a red blouse with white polka dots. I said, "Hi, Mom," and didn't think anything of it until about 30 seconds later. I heard a car pulling up in the drive and looked out. There was Mom coming home from work and dressed exactly as I'd just seen her. That really shook me up. She must have seen I looked pretty startled. Anyway, I told her what had just happened. She just shook her head and laughed a little bit, said she'd cut herself at work and was thinking how she needed to get a Band-Aid out of the bathroom as soon as she got home. Guess part of her got home before the rest of her did. And another one that my aunt sent in. There was some story about 2 guys coming home one night and seeing someone sitting along the road on a log or something. They thought he was drunk, so they went over to check on him, and the guy had no head. Appalachia is a weird place. Here's another one that took place when my aunt was 13 or 14 years old. This took place in Florida. I was about 13 or 14. We were living in a rented house. I know nothing of the history of the place, but don't have reason to think anything violent occurred there. Anyway, my little sister and I shared a room, and we slept in a double bed. One night I was in the middle of a dream when suddenly this announcer kind of voice broke in saying, literally, "We interrupt this dream to bring you an important message." Then, like in an old black and white movie, like Miracle on 34th Street springs to mind, this newspaper spun into view, stopping into focus with the headline, "Danger, wake up! Danger, wake up!" I woke up all right, and there was some shadowy black figure right beside the bed, with its face down inches from my own on the pillow. It was probably the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. When I woke up and looked at it, it stood upright. I don't remember if I prayed or not, at least not right away. But I did start pounding my sister with both fists, trying frantically to wake her up, but I could not rouse her. The thing stood watching me for several seconds, and I think it eventually glided to the foot of the bed, but after this many years, I'm no longer sure about that. I was too terrified to do anything. Eventually, though, I must have fallen back to sleep. I told my sister about it the next day, and maybe my mom, too. Can't quite remember. I have no idea what that was all about, but a few weeks later it happened again. I was awakened from a dream abruptly with the knowledge that I was in danger, and this time the figure was standing watching me from the foot of the bed. I must have told my Sunday school teacher about it eventually because I recall her being very concerned, and I was surprised and relieved at being taken seriously. Later, my sister and I traded rooms with my brother, and we had bunk beds then. One early evening, I was on the bottom bunk, and she was on the top, and I was bouncing her by kicking and shoving at the top bunk with my feet, and she was laughing and laughing. Suddenly, though, she got quiet and suggested we go outside. As soon as we got outside, she looked at me with these buggy eyes and asked, "Did you see it?" Well, I hadn't seen a thing, but she told me how a shadow suddenly appeared on the wall beside the bed, but there was no one there to make a shadow. When we moved to a new house, we never had these things happen again, but I really don't know if the apparition was connected with the rented house, or if it was something connected with the family, or even something I had inadvertently allowed access to my life because I had played around with the Ouija board. Eventually, I got rid of it, but I do believe it opened up some sort of occult influence. In my adult years, I realized how dangerous that sort of thing can be and prayed for forgiveness and claimed the blood of Christ over that ground I'd inadvertently given over to the enemy. Well, then I found the word, which means horror. Feeling of disgust, emotion of horror or dread. Also, thing which excites horror, from Old French horror, and directly from Latin, horror. Dread, veneration, religious awe, a figurative use, literally a shaking, trembling, as with cold or fear, shudder, chill, from horror, to bristle with fear, shudder. Also formerly in English, a shivering, especially as a symptom of disease or in reaction to a sour or bitter taste. Erection of the hairs on the skin, a ruffling as of water surface. Chamber of Horrors, originally 1849, was a gallery of notorious criminals in Madame Tussauds wax exhibition. Other noun forms are horribility, horribleness, horridity, horridness. And she goes on to say that I have never heard that word before or since, so no way us kids could have made use of it for thrills. And she sends in another one. The other story is more vague. It's been over 50 years, but it has a creepy twist. The Ouija board. I got it for Christmas or a birthday when I was about 10 years old. My friends and I played with it a lot, always being pretty sure one or the other of us was nudging the cursor along, but pretending we hadn't because it made the play more shivery and fun. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Anyway, in 1967, the Faye Dunaway Warren Beatty film, Bonnie and Clyde, came out, and I was pretty fascinated with them. Some friends and I decided we would attempt a seance to talk to the infamous gangsters. So over a period of days, We spoke to them via the Ouija board. I seem to recall they told us, or we pretended they did, that they were under the control of some authority figure and they couldn't talk to us for long, or something to that effect. Then things got scary. We asked who was controlling them. Again, maybe it was just kids being kids, but suddenly the board spelled out Gorst, and the cursor flew out of our hands and across the room. That was the last time we tried bringing back the spirits of Bonnie and Clyde. However, addendum to this story, I was in the 6th grade at the time that this happened, and I wanted to find out what Gorst meant, if anything. So I went to the school library where there was this massive unabridged dictionary, and I actually found the word. It meant horror. That really shook me. Now, the other day when I told you I had a story to tell that I needed to work up to, this was the story. I decided to try again to find out if Gorst was an actual word, or if I'd misremembered or something. At first, I couldn't find anything. And then I found this link. And the link will be in the description box below if you'd like to research that more on your own. Well, she goes on to say, I definitely didn't dream it up. And she says she's never heard that word before or since. So there's no way us kids could have made use of it for thrills. Now, this next one is an actual sighting by my cousin. And I am going to read it from the BFRO website, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website. It happened in 1995. The season was summer, the month of August, probably mid-month, and it happened in Washington State, Clark County. This incident occurred on our rural, somewhat wooded lane within sight of our house in Yacolt, Washington. Now, I have a disclaimer to say before I go and tell this story. My aunt and uncle and cousins live on a wooded property in Yacolt, Washington. And the children grew up, knowing the woods and knowing where they could and couldn't go. They also had a large dog who would be outside with them as they played and ventured. But I'm just saying this because some people think, who would let a little child wander the woods or wander around outside alone? Well, you have to remember when this happened. This happened years ago. And my cousins all know the property, and they lived out in the country. That's what country kids do. It's not like the city where someone's going to be lurching around and kidnap them. But I just want to put that out there so, it's not like my cousin was out wandering by himself and, in the middle of nowhere. That's not the case. So anyway, I'm reading this directly from the BFRO website. As usual, and this is my cousin speaking, as an adult, explaining what had happened to him when he was a child. As usual for my afternoon activity, I left the house to pick thimbleberries. I was approximately 50 yards away from the house and had been devouring berries for no more than 3 minutes. It was then that an enormous creature stood up suddenly from what I presume to have been a squatting position, from behind the hedge of thimbleberries, no more than 3 feet away from me. Although I was only 2 years old at the time, my memories of the incident remain quite clear. The creature was covered in thistly stark white fur. Its build consisted of exceptionally broad shoulders, long burly arms which dangled at its sides, and a waist easily twice as large as I was. The whole appearance gave it a rather squarish appearance. For the 3 or so seconds that I remained there, I stood petrified by how large the monster was. I didn't look up to see the monster's face, but my peripheral vision told me that it had a humanish-shaped head and that it touched a twig on the tree behind it. After those few seconds passed, I ran. I ran back to the house as fast as I could. I was terrified. Looking back and wondering what it might have been, I was looking on YouTube watching various Bigfoot documentaries when one showed a clip of a white creature very much similar to the one I had encountered many years ago. Only now do I know that what I had encountered was a Sasquatch. Also noticed, various members of the family have had vaguely unsettling experiences in the woods, creek, near our house over the years, which might well point to a Sasquatch's presence. Sounds of large unseen animal moving slowly through the brush, bad smells, dogs freaking out, feeling of the creeps when out alone in the woods, etc. But nothing as concrete as what the witness saw. There are also numerous recorded sightings by others in this vicinity over the years. Other witnesses. A note from witness, Mom. While no one else in the family saw the animal that frightened him, I do well remember him running into the house, quite terrified and almost incoherent, saying he'd seen a big white thing on the other side of the bushes. We had at the time a white standard poodle named Charlie, and when I asked him if perhaps he'd just seen her instead, he denied it vehemently, exclaiming, "How could Charlie have got that big?" I went out to see if I could find any trace of anything, but the ground was baked hard and there were no tracks of any sort. An acquaintance suggested a day or two later that I look for hair caught on a branch, which I did, but I found nothing. Less than a week later, a cougar was spotted in our neighbor's field, so I thought perhaps this was what my son had seen, or perhaps a deer, with bright sunlight shining on its fur, making it seem white. While we couldn't determine what he actually saw, the effect on him was unmistakable. For days, he would not go out of the house. If we had to drive somewhere, he insisted that both my husband and myself held his hands while we went from the front door directly to the car. And even then, he was obviously spooked and nervous. Eventually, he did go outside with his older siblings to play again. But it was many weeks before he'd venture out of the yard or go play alone. This all happened when he was 2.5 years old, so he didn't have the vocabulary to fully describe his encounter. But there was no doubt that something traumatic had indeed taken place. For years, we referred to this mysterious incident rather jokingly as Big White Thing and didn't think too much about it. Then a few months ago, when an alleged Bigfoot sighting on the East Coast made the news, my cousin and my aunt looked the subject up on your website and also looked at clips on YouTube. I still had not made the connection, and I don't know if the witness had either. But when we saw accounts of white Sasquatches being spotted, I looked at witness and he looked at me, and I just let out an "Oh my goodness." I asked him to describe the incident for me again, what he remembered of it, now that he was older, to see if any light could be shed on it. I had always thought he saw an animal move past him on the other side of the bush, but he clarified that for me, saying, "No, Mom, it rose up from the other side of the bush." This also struck a chord from what I later read on your website. He also says that to this day it remains the most terrifying thing he has ever encountered. He won't even watch Bigfoot documentaries now because they bring back frightening memories. I also asked him if at the time this happened, he had even heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch and had any idea what was meant by those terms. He said he had, but his concept of Bigfoot was a giant man, like Paul Bunyan. The fact that he didn't have any preconceived ideas about encountering a Sasquatch as a tall, furry, thick-set animal just adds credence to his story, in my opinion. Other stories. Some are listed on your own website. We're within a mile of Rachi Road, where another young boy reported seeing a Sasquatch some years back, and about a mile from the Yacolt Little League field, where there was apparently another sighting. We had not known of these sightings previously, but many people who live up here in the North County have their own Bigfoot stories to tell. And the environment of where this occurred, ours is a gravel lane lined at the time with thimbleberry bushes, vine maple, Douglas fir, and other thick growth. At the time, our property was bordered on two sides with forest land. We are within easy walking distance of Cedar Creek. And here's a follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Cliff Barackman. He says, "I spoke to both the witness and his mother on the evening of December 14th, 2010. The witness's memory of the event is understandably vague, but interestingly, developmentally appropriate for the young age at which he saw the creature. He largely described shapes, colors, and feelings. When asked for details on anatomy, he had little to add. He did note that its arms hung to its sides and were big. He described the color as an ivory white, which could indicate an albino individual. On a side note, the location of the sighting, Yacolt, Washington, is rich with Bigfoot history. The name Yacolt actually means the place abounding in evil spirits, which seems to be a likely Sasquatch reference." So that's all I have for you this Halloween evening. And I hope that you all have a safe Halloween. And thanks for watching. Squat your back out there.